So let me read the short description, and it really doesn't do the film justice. And it's only 15 minutes. So the film is called Dear Corky. New Yorker Corky Lee photographed his hometowns, Chinatown, and Asian American communities around the country for over 50 years, documenting activists, celebrities, and everyday heroes he encountered in over 100,000 photos. While documenting the latest rise of anti Asian hate crimes, Lee passed away from COVID-19. In his own words and photos, this short documentary reveals the man behind the camera. So we're going to get it started, and then we'll have plenty of time to discuss after. But just kind of give yourself the next 15 minutes to just take it in and just really, I don't know, we don't take a lot of time. I find even like looking for these videos for myself, I'm like, okay, you can just sit here and just watch this, right? Like let go of everything else, really take in this video. There's nothing else. I'm sure you all have long to-do lists, but in this little moment, there's nothing else for you to do than just be here together and in celebration. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, wait, I just want to make sure I clicked the include sound. I did not. There we go.
For over 65 years, AARP has empowered people to choose how they live as they age. As a nationwide champion, we advocate for better health, financial security, and stronger communities. We are AARP.
It's pretty quiet, Janelle. I don't know if you can turn up the.
All right, yeah, I can. Okay, I'm ready. Let me see. Okay. Being a street photographer, I see a different part of Chinatown that the general public does not see. It's not a drive-by tourist destination to me. It's a real living community of people trying to survive. There's a human side of the story. We're not docile. We had some genuine concerns. I've been photographing Chinatown since my college days. That would be in the late 60s. Through the Third World movement, there was a growing intensity to tell stories ourselves and not let the mainstream society dictate to us what we should see and believe. I think that the photographs I have of Chinese Americans exercising their democratic rights, voicing concerns about things as simple as tenant eviction and specialized high school entrance exams, it shows that Chinese care about their community. I never liked the idea of being a model minority. I was never good in math or in science. I just said, well, if I'm going to be a responsible individual in this society, I got to do something else. I chose photography. It was something that I sort of picked up. At times, I'd want to be that person in front of the camera, but I can't be that person in front of the camera. So I'm looking for a suitable substitute to be my voice. But I also got him in there. There he goes again. Over the period of 5 decades, I've taken hundreds of thousands of photographs.
My dad was a veteran of World War II.
When I was younger, there were days that I would photograph 3 events easily. Right, this way. I sort of got an inspiration from New York Times photographer Bill Cunningham, who would photograph 3 or 4 social events riding around on a bicycle. My parents started to understand what I was doing when my photographs appeared in Chinese language publications. Or if I would have a photograph in one of the newspapers, and I would tangentially leave a copy of that on the kitchen table so they would happen to see it. My mother would brag about it. She would tell all the tenants in Confucius Plaza. She says, "Oh, this is my son." That was basically a sense of pride that I was recognized outside of my own family, but within the Chinese community. People have been referring to me as Corky Lee as far back as junior high school. I think it was my Jewish friend that gave me the name Corky, because the name that I was using was, at the time, was Cork. The spelling was Quoork. So, but they basically transliterate Cork to Corky. So I became Corky. Okay.
I told him you have to meet Corky. So you want to tell
That's my stuff
That's
over
how
there.
I can meet you.
When people look at the photographs, they can sort of read into it that this is what was done during a certain period of time. If they see deplorable conditions, they can say, this has to change. And maybe it'll motivate people to do something to enact those changes, either individually or collectively. Well, were you in Chinatown when Muhammad Ali came? No?
The PS1 though.
You were at PS1?
PS1.
1975. This is right after the Thriller in Manila. Before people started to come up to me and tell me that they liked the photograph, yeah, maybe I was somewhat invisible. But if I was invisible, I didn't want the larger community, Asian Pacific Americans, to be invisible. So what have you heard about me? It's probably exaggerated.
Social photographer, like you're
Social
like the
photographer?
godfather of Asian American like photography. It's like you're like
The grandfather, did you say?
the grandfather.
Really dating me now.
You never gave up, that's the thing, and now you're at a very crucial point with your work. The important part is the front end being an activist.
Yeah,
Your
well,
work.
I'm probably more of an activist.
Be the voice for these people. The pictures are there, they're historic already, so you can't go back in time and shoot that.
After people see my photographs, they'll basically learn something about what it is to be Asian American. It's an attempt to educate people one photograph at a time. This photograph is a front page photograph from the New York Post that I was able to get in 1975. I did an end around run, kind of like a wide receiver in football. I beat out the Daily News photographer over here. But my photograph appeared on the same day that this took place. The Daily News photograph appeared the following day. This was from Arguably the largest protest by Chinese Americans in New York City. There's like 20,000 that came out, and it had to do with an incident of police brutality. These two guys were in school together, and they were the tallest guys, and every time that the Chinese kids would get picked on and bullied, that they would stand up to them. But the key thing among all this whole thing is this black kid right in the middle. And he's got this grin on his face or smile. And he just can't believe that Chinese are protesting police brutality, because that's something that happens in the black community and the Hispanic community all the time. This is from the 1982 when the union, ILGW, International Lady Garment Workers Union, called for a strike in Columbus Park and 15,000 garment workers. This has to be the largest labor, protest in Chinatown ever. And this is a candlelight vigil. This woman is lighting candles for a 9/11 vigil that takes place annually in Chatham Square. There are two streets that are named after Chinese who died. My photography connects me to people. You can be alone but not be lonely, I think. I started to lose sleep after my wife passed away. At the time, I had worked out something with the Museum of Chinese Americas back in 2001, and they wanted me to do an exhibit of my photography. So actually, when they heard that my wife was in hospice care, and particularly when she passed, they called me up and asked me if they should postpone the exhibit, the solo exhibit. And I said, okay, fine. Let me go ahead. Basically, I went into the darkroom and I did all my grieving, printing photographs in preparation for the exhibit. And it took me about 2 weeks. I came out, and still a lot of people who came to the wake. I mean, to the opening, because it was probably a couple of weeks after the wake and the funeral. They didn't know. So, and you just sort of move on, because I think that's what my wife would want me to do. It's always been a pretty tough balance. I have to pay the rent, so I have to generate enough income on a monthly basis or an annual basis. Ideas are worth nothing if you can't generate a paycheck. The tough part about being compensated for my work is, especially if it appears on the internet, people think it's in the public domain. So when I see it, I basically let people know. I wish you had asked me permission so I could say yes or no. As I collect more, these photographs will become valuable. And basically, I've always looked at the collection as my 401k. As I start to age, I get really tired and exhausted. I have chronic arthritic knees. I'll go home and I'll have cramps in my forearm and my legs and so forth, and I know I've been up on my feet for like 6 hours. After a gala dinner or something, I don't get a chance to eat. So I'll stop by a halal food truck, after I get out of the subway, and then maybe I'll take a painkiller or two. Then I'll be okay. I ask myself, how much longer can I do this? How much longer can I hold all the equipment and get the photographs? I could probably do this for another 15 years. I'll just keep going until I can't do it anymore. I may be 6 feet under pushing up daisies when people realize that I've had this tremendous visual record of what took place in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. It's almost the history of Chinese in America. I'm okay with not being recognized at this point, because as long as the photographs are still around and they're circulated or deposited, let's say in the Library of Congress, researchers will start looking. At this stage of my life, I'm happy with it. I can leave something for future generations. A lot of college students come up to me and say, Corky, I studied you in college. That generally makes me laugh, and I said, if I got a dollar for every time my name is mentioned in a college lecture, I'd be a rich man in China, but I'm still a struggling photographer in America. I've been asked why I continue taking the activist photographs, and I said, if I don't do it, I can't think of anybody else that would do it. But in doing so, I know I've empowered and inspired other people to do the same thing. Maybe I'll encourage someone else to take up the cause, and if they're willing to sacrifice financial gain, that they can become the next Corky Lee.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for watching together. So we often keep these discussions really open, and I would love to hear from you all just general reflections, anything that stood out to you, if you were familiar with Corky and his work before. I can kind of get us started by just saying that I was not familiar with Corky Lee, and I feel really sad about that. I think, I feel very sad that I was not familiar with his work prior to him passing. I love photography, and his photos are I find them so moving, and in a way that offhand, I can't think of a lot of other photos like that where there's decades of documentation of a group of people in one area over time like that, specifically around activism, right? And it's just like, it's such a beautiful body of work, and it's such a amazing physical representation of a group of people over generations. And I I'm just really, like I said, I'm sad that I was not more familiar with him before he passed, but he kind of said at the end, as long as people keep seeing his photos, and they end up someday that people are able to reflect on them and learn from them, he kind of met his goal, and that's why he keeps doing it, or kept doing it. So I feel really glad that we're taking this time to kind of talk about his work today, and view the photographs, and see it that way. But so I'm really curious. I have other thoughts, but if there's a photograph that stood out to you, or a certain part of the video that stood out to you, or any general reflections that you might have. Ling.
Hi. Okay. So yeah, towards the end, it was kind of sad learning that he passed away, because of COVID. But what I wanted to kind of, comment on is that one, uh, I was never good at science and math, so that was something relatable, and I had to pick something that was, as a career and also as something that I wanted to do, since college, is to kind of help people, make a difference in people's lives in the community where I'm at, which I'm able to do currently. So I'm grateful for that. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is that having those photos is such a powerful tool, right? For the new generation to kind of go back and learn through the lens, right, of what happened, and what have changed throughout these years. And that's kind of resonate with me on the fact that in Cambodia during the war in the 70s, what remained was some very small amount of like photos that were taken during the war and things like that, and that are kept as part of documentary. And you can see those photos. Some of them are very violent, and not for everyone to kind of look at, but it served as a purpose for the new generation to learn about what happened. Similarly to what the ancient, our ancestors really. At the time, they didn't obviously have cameras or camcorders or anything like that, so they carved, stories and things like that on the wall. Um, so that was just something kind of pointed out to me, and thought it was very interesting, to learn through the lens of a camera. You can learn a lot.
Thank you, Ling. That stood out to me so much too. It felt so different than we take in a lot of information and content these days, right? Like on our phones and videos and scrolling, and it's like really fast. And there was something so striking to me about the black and white photos of people and faces and like events that were happening, and in these moments in time that he captured. And they were really, really, really impactful in a way where if I had read a story about him or seen something on social media, it just like it hit so differently. And so thank you for sharing that, Ling, and for sharing that connection to the war in Cambodia and how important those photos are as well. Anybody else want to share any general reflections or thoughts or anything that stood out to you? Samantha.
So I just wanted to point out, I think the photo that caught my attention was the suffrage woman, and this might be ignorant of me, but I did not realize that like Asian women were involved in the suffrage movement. I always thought like, oh, they're just, black and white kind of thing, and just never thought about like other ethnic ethnicities involved. And another thing, I felt kind of ashamed for someone who frequents Chinatown in New York so often. And to see these photos, I'm just like, oh my goodness, like these were happening throughout the time that like in the later years that I frequent Chinatown there so often, but I just never focus on a lot of things that happened in a small area like that. So I thought that was really interesting, and I actually Googled him and found out that they name a street or an alleyway called Corky Way Alley in Chinatown for him. So I thought that was really great. So he lives on.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it is amazing, like the history, these little like bits and pieces of history that we saw through the video that, I wasn't aware of either. Like you said, especially the activism piece, but through one photo that, opened up your mind to this whole, part of history that you didn't know prior, and, could be something that we like look into further or learn more about. So thank you for sharing that. Deb.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I thought it was one of the photos that struck me. There were dozens that did. One just offhand with the two brothers standing in the on the fire escape outside of their tenement in New York City, in Chinatown. And the other one was the generations of people, or of people who of they got together around the building of the rails across the country, which were a big thing, where the immigrants from China, once the railway and the trainways were being built across America, came and really were the central part of building the railroads. And it was really a sort of an amazing picture to see, the descendants of those people getting together. There's a really rich history of Chinese, and again, the building of and their how they in the vote, their vote, and then the being part of the building of California itself, and then in the 40s, we talk about the Japanese and the incursion of Japanese during World War II, where they were put into camps, etc. So there's a rich history of, what we talk about this month, people's, but also a huge history of how they were discriminated against, and as well, that America has got to own at some point. And I think it was just recently, I think I may be totally wrong with this, but I think it was just recently where the vice president apologized for some of the stuff.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think one of the things from this video that I felt was missing a little bit was that they mentioned that he was photographing throughout the rise in Asian American violence and racism through COVID, but we didn't really see any of that in this documentary or any of his photos from that or revelations from that time. So I'm very curious to and then he ultimately passed away while he was doing that. But I'm curious to kind of see his work from that time right before he passed and kind of what he was documenting, because I thought that was very interesting that he was that was like a whole other wave within Chinatown, of what he was documenting and a very current issue. So I'm going to do some digging, and if I find anything, I'll share that, because I would really like to see that as well.
I
Any
think
other?
also,
Yeah.
I think it should be mentioned about what Josh has sent out just recently about,
Yeah.
maybe Josh can sort of take a little stab at this and talk about what, the history and in the recent history of Chinatowns.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I was really struck by that when I was watching this, because it does kind of correspond so well with the article that I published from Rhonda's great inspiration. But basically, at the last DEI&B meeting, Rhonda had suggested sort of digging into Chinatowns, because they're sort of, for a number of reasons, kind of dwindling in terms of numbers and just sort of prominence as a part of our culture. And so I did a lot of research on it and sort of found that, like, just the origins of how they came about in this country, which was largely from immigration from the gold rush, and then how they've kind of come to be, how they're really important cultural hubs, not just for Chinese Americans. They sort of started as neighborhoods where they could share that space with one another, but they've grown into something like larger that are really important parts of our cities, that are facing a lot of challenges today because of things like gentrification, but also the spike in racial violence from COVID. So I'm gonna pull up that article and I'll throw it in the chat so you guys can read that yourself.
I
But it
dropped it
was,
in the chat.
oh, thank you. But yeah, I would, that was my first thought when I watched it, was how much it corresponded with everything that we had been talking about with that.
I know when I found it, Josh, I was like, this is so perfect because you had just, sent us that article yesterday. So I did put that in the chat, but it really is, it's like the visual to go along with the article that you wrote. So, now we have these beautiful photos of Chinatown in New York City to go along with the article that you wrote, Josh. So thank you for doing that research. And it really, I don't know, these months kind of allow us to dive into these topics that I haven't heard of. I'm not seeing this in the general news, like Rhonda kind of like, dropped a little hint for us, and Josh did some exploring, and Samantha had some input too. And it's just so nice to have each other to be like share, like, hey, we got to keep an eye on this. This is something you should know about. Like, let's look into this more. So I really appreciate this space to be able to do that. Was there anybody that was familiar with Corky Lee before this video? I'm just really curious. You don't have to unmute. You can put it in the chat if you want.
I haven't, but I definitely want to just state how so much of a strong comparison with natives and the Asian American, how both cultures move into the urban areas. With I call it the Second Indian Removal Act, when natives went into the urban areas, and even natives had their own hubs throughout cities of LA, Boston, New York, Maryland, and this to see, I mean, those hubs did not last for Native people because it was so expensive to live in these urban areas. But to see that the Chinatowns were so strong and it kept going through all these centuries, and now to see it almost losing to the point. I mean, when I was living in New York, I always went to Chinatown, but now I see the way it's happening, and how it's not as strong as it used to be. I try to go every time I go to a different city, like I was just in Chicago, and I try to hit those. I think I was in Chinatown every day when I was up there eating up, because I'm a big foodie. But been on the Cape for I think 14 years and never been to the Chinatown in Boston, so it's definitely on my bucket list. But I think that everybody, we really need to push Chinatowns and try to support the restaurants and the places and the businesses that they offer.
Brandon.
It's interesting. I'm surprised to hear about the article that you sent out, Josh, the decline in Chinatowns. I've been fortunate enough to travel around the world, and the first thing that my husband and I go to is Chinatowns in Thailand and Singapore and Australia, and they are hopping. I mean, it is incredible. The food and stores and just the culture there. We love it. So I'm wondering if the trend is just in the U.S. and not necessarily internationally with Chinatowns. To look into that.
Everything everything I was sort of focused on was domestically. But my guess would be that you're probably right, that it's probably more of a problem here.
I didn't get to read the article, but do you guys know if this problem was before or after COVID in the decline of Chinatown?
It was definitely during COVID.
It was during
I
COVID.
was following it. I was like, I gotta go to these Chinatown. But yes, I mean that's when I first heard about it. And it was it was on the news, and a lot of articles is taking place. But I'm not sure. But Joshua, I mean, you might know more.
It's kind of both. Before COVID, there were noticeable shifts in population, with people moving to the suburbs and things like that. And then after COVID, I think the problem was exacerbated by just the lack of safety from violence against Asian communities. So kind of the answer is kind of yes.
So are we thinking that, and I'm sorry, Josh, to go to you, like you're the end all be all for this, but are we thinking that the Asians started moving out because of the violence, or we just think that people stopped supporting the community?
The explanation that I found when I was looking around was basically that like violence makes any area less desirable. Like like you're less likely to go get a bite to eat somewhere where you don't feel safe, or you might witness violence, or so yeah, stuff like that.
I think before even COVID started, Chinatown was kind of losing ground to like the native individual who kind of started Chinatown in the first place, because the rent and just being able to afford to live in the city were increasing rapidly, and there were, large amount of like international students from China, from other part of the world, who kind of wanted to, live around the Chinatown area. So, with all this newer apartments, building in that area, kind of forces, you know, some of the older folks who've been living there for a long time with low rent to not be able to afford them anymore, and they kind of have to, like, move out. Um, so I've seen a lot of, smaller businesses close down, um, and COVID didn't help.
I guess for me, I'm wondering why or what the plan is behind keeping this such a big secret. So like, because obviously I didn't know until Rhonda had presented it to us in the DEI committee. But another thing that I found interested in is one of his photos when he had they were at a rally for police brutality. And that's something that I was never aware of, or I've never heard in the media. So, me, I'm always like, hey, I wonder, does this go back to design, and what is the big secret? Because if we don't know, then we can't make change. So it's my little 2 cents.
Yeah, Nicole, I was thinking that too, and I really, of so many of the photos, and even what Samantha said, like not knowing that Asian American women were really involved with the suffragette, movement, and um yeah, I was so struck by that, and thinking like, why hasn't some of this taken center stage, like both the activism and the problems that people are advocating for, just kind of go unseen. And Corky said himself that he felt invisible as an Asian American, and that one of his missions was, I have like goosebumps, but was to help his fellow Asian Americans not be invisible, right? And so I think there's probably, whether, so much of that is by design, as you said, like a connection there between this like invisibility that he described feeling, not, and he described others feeling, and then these huge things that were going on in the community that we even say, I never knew that happened. I didn't know that happened. And Dad, I know you had mentioned that, the camps, the Japanese camps, concentration camps that we had. And I have a vivid memory of being a child and learning so much about concentration camps through the Holocaust. And years later, finding out that we had camps, on American soil. And I was like, what, like so blown away at that. And again, I think it might come back to this invisibility piece, and like whose stories are being told, whose stories are being shared, whose stories, it's this thing of just like this continuation of it's so important to hear all stories, like all these different perspectives, because some stories are not being shouted from the rooftops for, a variety of different reasons. And we have to go seeking them out.
And it's probably going back, and I can just say from our point of view, but some people or some cultures believe that they expect the next generation to take it over and the next generation to handle their issues versus going out to other people to take care, just like this issue going into Chinatown. They're Native people, Asian people, of going even seeking therapy is a taboo. So asking for help from other people, I can imagine that's a taboo, and they're probably waiting for their own next generation to take it over or fix this. But I think it takes all of America to take care of each other.
I agree, Rhonda. I just want to piggyback off of you really quickly too. I think a lot of people are scared too, right? Because if we keep going back generations to generations, everybody's wasn't, and some people still are not open to the conversation. So I think as time progresses and knowledge and pardon me, being able to access the information, is very important, because then people are able to form their own opinions and gain knowledge, and then they're able to make change. So you are right. I think a lot of it is like people are waiting for the next generation. It's like, no, we have to change along with them and not be so afraid. And I think it's coming to that point where people are not afraid anymore, and they're able to band together and have allyships. And I think that's where it starts.
It's also sort of the whitewashing of America, that people don't want to hear sort of anything negative about what happened or our history of America, and actually refuse, in many cases, refuse to admit that, we weren't, the greatest country in the world about certain things. Although admitting to that certainly makes us a better country. That's number one. Number two is that if you look at the news today, you can't find anything that takes, a little bit of work to think about or write about, because it's all such fluff. It's all such sort of candy. The news that, and even in the newspapers, like the Times or the Washington Post, the great newspapers, just don't have the reporters, or don't have the time. They don't think to really look into some of these issues. So they don't write about them. They certainly don't come onto TV, because you have to talk about something like this for 15 minutes, maybe a half hour, and their segments are only 30 seconds or a minute, so they don't fit into the model of the news these days. And all the news that they basically produce are gone today, and it's what's ever new tomorrow. So things that have to be thoughtful, or that are thoughtful, or that are that we, as this committee at least, thinks is important, just doesn't find itself newsworthy.
You're so right. That's even like that comparison, like it showed up so much in the video itself, like Corky talking about, going into the dark, like he grieved in the dark room, right? So like the loss of his wife, but like the visual to me of like him going into the dark room. I don't know if anybody has ever been in a dark room, like in a high school photography. That's as far as I went, but like that visual of him in there, like that's such a slow process for him to like take these photos and go in and print them out all manually and like get them right the way that he wanted. And there was like a slowing down in his own art that he's sharing with us, like that is in such juxtaposition of like all the content that we're taking in now, and then to have a conversation about it as we are today, or even like I said in the beginning of this, which was like, you have permission to put things to the side for 15 minutes to actually take in this video, which we don't even do. Like we're multitasking and like reading the news while we're also watching it. And we've talked about this before, I think when we talked about kindness as a community, right, it takes a slowing down to be kind and to be civil and to seek out the information that is actually helpful. So that's a really good point. Victoria, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna say also, and I just got to put in, I love black and white photography, and some of those pictures were gorgeous. So I'm hoping they will make it somewhere like a museum or somewhere that, you know, a bigger majority could look at it. But a lot of the issues too, to look back into the history, like I've worked in a school and history has become, you know, it's disappearing. So that's not a big study right now. And so I don't know if this current generation going through the schools are even aware of some of these issues. So basically, like Chinatown, I've been to several Chinatowns around, and it's almost like people would think of it in a touristy way. You know, when you come across Chinatown, they're beautiful, you know, bright, and the clothing and the stores close together and the food and stuff. So I don't know if there's a lot of people that are even knowledgeable about the histories of Chinatown. So that was it.
Thank you for sharing that. That's scary to think that history is disappearing from schools.
Where it goes back taking down monuments, you know, from the, you know, as a Southern girl, you know, I always say you better watch out taking down those monuments, because when you take down even how bad it can be and hurtful, you're going to forget the history of good or bad. And I think we need to remember our history so we don't repeat ourselves. And when you see the beautiful Chinatowns and their history and their culture, I think, you know, I'm trying to stay positive, but sometimes I think that's what they want us to, everybody want, they want everybody to look like each other and just wipe out all of this so we can all adapt to the American way. But it's so important to have this unique culture. I think that's what makes up America.
Any other thoughts, or anybody else have a photo that really stood out to them? I know it kind of moved fast, but there were definitely some things in there that caught my attention. I dropped in the chat Corky Lee's official website if anybody wants to explore further. I'm definitely going to take a look at that. And like I said, I'm interested to see his most, you know, recent work, and if those photos did get published from his time documenting the, you know, racism against Asian Americans in Chinatown throughout COVID. And if I find that, I will also share that. All right. Well, last call for anybody else to share. Feel free to drop into the chat. But while you're thinking, I will just say I continue to be so grateful to this community that just keeps showing up for these conversations and having them, even though we don't have all the answers or even all the information. And I really feel it with this one, where, like I said, I don't think anybody here, at least that shared, was familiar with Corky Lee prior to watching this video. And so now, you know, right now it says 25 people. We had like almost 30 at one point. There's 30 people that now are, and maybe a couple of us will do a little further research. And Samantha said she's going to go to Corky Lee Way next time she's in Chinatown. So I feel really grateful that, you know, we went from nobody knowing who he was, and now this group of people knows who he is and can make sure that he is not invisible, right? That was what he wanted. So he's not invisible within this virtual room anymore. So thank you all so much for being here and for being so open-hearted and having an open mind, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Janelle. Thank you.